Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Laurie Sperry. I'm a board-certified behavior analyst with a background in forensic psychology and criminal investigation. And it's my great pleasure to be able to speak to you about autism spectrum disorder. Today we're going to be talking about the characteristics of autism. And you may hear me refer to it as neurodiversity. So those are terms that are used interchangeably oftentimes. We're going to be talking about tools to work with your autistic clients. It's another thing I'll be doing interchangeably. It turns out that people with autism refer to have identity first language used. So sometimes I'll be saying your autistic clients, and then other times I'll be saying people with autism, because it turns out that clinicians like myself are more comfortable using people first language. So I'll be flipping back and forth. And I'll be presenting some real-world scenarios that will allow you to formulate a plan to support your clients who are neurodiverse. Now, I have had the great pleasure to work with wonderful parole officers and parole agents. And I asked this question of some of the agents that I've worked with. You hear autism and you think, what? Well, here's how one of the parole officers answered this question. She said, you think the worst. It's such a spectrum. You have to individualize the conditions because they might not be able to meet them as written because of their disability. It's not about special treatment, she said. It's about making sure there are accommodations to help them be successful. And I thought, wow, that is a really, really great way of responding to that question. What do you think when you're about to get a client with autism? What goes through your mind? Is everybody a genius? Are they all like the show Atypical? Are they quirky? Are they all dangerous? Well, autism is a spectrum, and we're going to be learning a little bit more about that today. So what do I mean by that? Autism is a spectrum. Well, what I mean is that some people with autism can be hyperverbal, and there's so much language going on. And I've also worked with clients that are nonverbal. And some of my clients are nonverbal, but highly intelligent. And some of my clients are nonverbal and also have co-occurring intellectual and cognitive impairments. Being verbal or nonverbal, it's a spectrum. Executive functioning, what do I mean by that being a spectrum? Well, some of the clients I've worked with are highly systematized, highly organized, and then I have other folks that really struggle to plan and organize anything at all. Perseverative thinking. Well, because we've been talking, or we are talking about people who have been radicalized, they may get stuck in this cognitive rigidity, and they perseverate and they ruminate and they can't get off that topic. When I've seen it in terms of the legal system, that might be folks that have engaged in stalking behaviors or who have been radicalized, and they have these recurring intrusive thoughts, and they just perseverate on it. They just keep going with it. Now, sensory processing, that's also a spectrum. Some people that I work with, I have one client who we were trying to figure out what prison was going to look like for him because he has so many sensory sensitivities that he cannot wear shoes because his pinky toe cannot touch the side of a shoe. And then I've had clients who have walked around with broken arms because they are hyposensitive and they didn't realize that they had been hurt. So imagine that if you have a client that's in prison or in a residential reentry center or even out in the community, the challenges that might present. Restricted and repetitive behaviors and interests, well, that's also a spectrum. Some of the people that I work with have gotten aggressive because their access to their restricted repetitive interest was interrupted, while others are more novelty seeking. So there's kind of a shelf life, if you will, to their restricted repetitive behavior or interest. And then social awareness. You and I probably exist on a social spectrum similar to people with autism, in the sense that some of you out there might think a big Saturday night is spending it with 300 people at a sports bar watching a game. While some of you out there might think, you know, a good Saturday night is at home with a good book, adult beverage, and one of my pets. So for the people with autism, what you'll find is that some of them have social behaviors, but they're like too much. So they have just as many social behaviors as other people, but they're too heavy, or they're like over the top. And then you have folks that you'll work with who are very socially withdrawn, and that's just not an interest to them, and it's not reinforcing, and it's super anxiety provoking. So again, you're going to see people across the spectrum. So even though autism is a spectrum, each of the areas or characteristics of autism also present as part of the spectrum. And that's why it's sometimes really hard for us to wrap our minds around, does that guy really have autism? Because he looks so different from the last guy I worked with, or the last woman I worked with autism. So if you're starting to feel like there are things that are presenting differently, make sure you reach out to your colleagues, or to people in the field, or even to me, if you need some support around working with a client. So that's where we come to this idea of autism as a hidden disability. And what does that mean? Well, I think the best way to describe that is a way it was described for me by a parent. And they said to me, you know, if my kid was in a wheelchair, I'd be a hero. And I'm not trying to minimize the experiences of people in a wheelchair. What the mom was trying to say is that it would be obvious. But her child went into Walmart and had a massive meltdown, and store security was called because he was overwhelmed by the lights and the sounds and the crowds and the sales. And store security was called, and people started making assumptions. That kid's bad, and you're a terrible mom. And so again, it's a hidden disability. It is not immediately obvious to us because it's behaviorally defined, okay? So there's no obvious physical disability. There's no, apparent look of a person with autism. But what you may find is that they have like this overly familiar manner. Now imagine how poorly that plays with law enforcement, police officers, guards in prisons. I have one client who has told me that he's really struggling in a prison setting, and he said, well, I'm kind of like a junior staff around here. And I said, no, you're not. So, it's kind of that I'm part of the crowd here. On the other hand, you might have somebody that is self-isolating, and so they have completely withdrawn and prefer to be alone. You might notice some social awkwardness where, they're saying things or doing things that are just like a couple beats off the rhythm that everybody else is on. I have one client that recently said to me, can I say something rude? And before I could say no, he said, when I put my glasses on, I can see how old you look. Well, thanks for that. But again, it's just one of those things where he was just telling the truth, which kind of gets to the last bullet point around concrete and literal thinking. Like, that's the truth. You do look old. Okay, but we usually don't say things like that out loud. So you can see where some of this leads to folks not fitting in. I have found that to create particular challenges when people are in residential reentry centers, and even more so in prison, People with autism tend to be unaffiliated prisoners, so they haven't found that group that will keep them safe and help them navigate the prison system in a safe manner. And then, of course, there's the quirky behavior. And there are multiple examples of that, including my young friend who told me that I looked old once he put his glasses on. I'm going to share with you some practical tools to help your autistic clients. First and foremost, establish a routine. We want to provide your clients with a visual schedule that can include what we call behavioral contingencies. A behavioral contingency or a planned contingency is like, first you do this, then you get that. That's not bribing or coercion. It's called how the world works, right? First you go to work and then you get a paycheck. First you finish your honey-do list and then you get to do what you want for the rest of the afternoon. It's how life works. It's really important for people with autism. And what I'm finding is, especially as they go from a highly structured prison environment into a less structured residential reentry center, and then maybe they're released into their home or a group home, I am finding that my clients get really prompt dependent. So, in prison, they're told when to get up and when to eat and when to go to the yard and when to shower. And then they have more freedoms around their schedule, and they start to really struggle about how to organize their day. So we want to establish that routine for them. Why it helps is that it reduces anxiety. There is so much good research out there that shows that when people with autism know what to expect of them and things are made clear, it reduces their anxiety. So if they don't know, what's about to happen and what am I supposed to do, their anxiety goes up, and guess what? So does problem behavior. But when they know what to expect of them, their anxiety goes down, and so does their problem behavior, and that makes everybody happy. It also helps delay gratification. So let's say that you had somebody at a residential reentry center who was really into video games, right? And they started engaging in lots of behavior to access the video games, like trying to pilfer, different technology, or that's something that got them in trouble in the first place. If they saw when they were going to get access to it, it helps them delay gratification. So it helps us, the professionals working with them, with delivering the word no. No, you can't do that right now. You'll get to do it later today. You'll get to do it after you fill in the blank. So first you have to do this, and then later today you'll get access to it. So no isn't kind of this amorphous thing like, I don't know when I'll ever get to do my most favorite thing in the world. It provides an opportunity for them to see when they'll get access to the thing that is most meaningful to them. All right? So establishing a routine is really, really important for folks with autism. And this is what a daily routine might look like. And it's something that I developed for one of my guys because his favorite thing was just to have time away from everybody and chill out. So I also found that, when he was in prison, he had all of these great ideas of things he wanted to do as soon as he got to a residential reentry center. And then, I kept hearing from the folks at the center, he lays around in bed a lot. And so we had to kind of get a routine going. And I said to him, what happened to all your big ideas about stuff you were going to do once you got released? And he said, I guess I need somebody to tell me to do them. So this is the somebody, except it's not a person. Again, it gives them agency. It gives them control over their day. Get up and work out. Take a shower, get dressed, eat breakfast, take the bus to work. Work, you get to go home, and then your fun activity is to chill out, be by yourself. You get an hour in your room by yourself to do nothing. And then prep for dinner, eat, clean up, and then they have the rest of their evening. But again, something as simple as this allows the person to know, what do I have to do? When do I have to do it? And when do I get to do what I want to do? Here's another thing that I have found incredibly helpful. Remember, I mentioned that if they don't know what's expected of them, they can get really anxious. And so meeting with you, meeting with me might be really anxiety provoking. In that situation, we have a lot more power than they do. So provide them with an agenda. I can't begin to tell you how helpful this has been for getting folks through a meeting with me without any kind of outburst. So here's an example agenda. So I actually have this written out and I hand it to my clients, or if I'm doing telehealth, I show them on the video screen. First thing we're going to do is cover last week's homework. The reason why that's important is that they know that if I assign them something, there's no getting around it. We are going to do that first. And in this particular meeting, we were talking about the person's release date. What's your job application status? You have a meeting coming up with your parole officer next week. And the last thing we're going to do is assign homework. So the other thing I found is that during times of stress, autistic people really struggle to access the language they do have. If you've ever had that experience where you've been like, a witness or pulled over by the police and you're a really articulate person and then in the moment of stress you're like, magnify that, by 1,000, and that's what it's like for a person with autism. So I found that without this, I'll say, what'd you talk to your PO about? I don't know. So here was the homework for that particular week. Make a list of questions for your PO meeting, and they go in with that. Update that spreadsheet of job applications. People with autism have about an 84% unemployment rate, and that's without a felony conviction. So imagine how difficult it is for folks with autism to get a job when they've had, justice involvement. So there are going to be more misses than there are hits. And what I always say is have a spreadsheet so that you can show your PO, I am making every effort to get a job, and it can keep them organized. This is a job I applied for on this date. Did I hear back? What was the result? Do I need to follow up? So just a way of staying organized, and then review volunteer opportunities. So what I wanted to do here is just show you, this doesn't have to be a big elaborate thing, but by having things in writing for the person with autism that you're working with, it can completely lower their anxiety and make a potentially very difficult meeting or an unproductive meeting go so much more smoothly. Which leads us to our next task. A task analysis is taking a big task that seems like huge and overwhelming and probably anxiety provoking and breaking it down into simple tasks. And why it's important is that it reduces task avoidance. People with autism sometimes get really, really good at avoiding tasks. And here's how that maybe has worked their entire life. So imagine that you're the parent of a child with autism and you say, clean your room. And the child says, no. And you say, but I need you to clean your room. And you say it in a little bit sterner tone. And the child with autism is like, oh, I'm going to up the ante. And at some point, that demand is removed. And inadvertently, what we've done is strengthen that more intense behavior. And that more intense behavior might be property destruction or aggression or verbal aggression. But the removal of that task has strengthened that problem behavior. And so if you've been practicing that for 10, 20, 30 years, you get really good at it. But if we take a tool or we take a task and we break it down, clean your room, for example, pick up the wrappers off your floor, all right? Put your dirty clothes in the hamper. So we're breaking it down, and we can reward each step of that to get the person closer and closer to completing the task. And this is really, really helpful. Applying for a job. That can feel like a very overwhelming thing, especially if your client has never had a job. So let's say they were arrested at a young age, or, as I mentioned, 84% of people with autism are unemployed. So what does that even look like? They're not coming to you with the same experiences that maybe some of your other clients have had, where they've had even, summer jobs as teens. They usually haven't had any kind of job. So let's break that down for you. What are your strengths? What are you good at? And what do you want to do? Finding the interests of people with autism is one of their superpowers. When we can dial into those adaptive interests, that becomes their deep interest. That becomes their circumscribed interest or their restricted behavior, and they can be the best at what their interest is. Then find agencies that can help. I'm always amazed at how many of my clients with autism who are justice involved have never been connected to their Developmental Disabilities Resource Center, their Division of Voc Rehab, and so there are programs out there. Not going to lie, there's waiting lists. But what else are they doing? So let's immediately get them on those waiting lists. Let's get the ball rolling in that direction and get them connected with these services. Fair Chance Jobs, Goodwill has a whole program for people with disabilities and justice-involved disabilities, and that has been a wonderful resource for my clients. Is more education and training needed? Lots of folks with autism haven't gone to school or higher education, or maybe they did, but what they want to do with their lives isn't syncing up with the training they've had. So is there training and education needed? They don't have a resume. They should research the company and make sure that's something they want to do. And then these are all the steps in applying for the job, preparing for the interview, and all of the social niceties, like getting there early and sending a follow-up thank you to the interviewer. So this is how we would take that big, you need to be applying for jobs, and breaking it down in a way that people with autism can successfully complete it. And as you see, as they check those things off, they could take a break and reinforce themselves with something. It's just a way of breaking down a big task. So one of the clients that I work with was having to communicate with his parole officer via email. And the parole officer was like, what is with this guy? He's rude, he's entitled, he acts like I'm the bad guy, and like it just was coming off really poorly. And so I said to him, look, we need to work on writing civil emails. And his response was, I know how to write emails. Let's look at the email you're writing. And because people with autism are very visual learners, if you can put a picture in there, they say a picture says 1,000 words, and that is so true with people with autism. So I said, we're going to write an email sandwich. This is a civil email sandwich. The bread is your friendly or opening remarks. The filling is what I called the content or the ask. What are you asking your PO for? And the bread is your friendly closing remarks. So, again, this might not be something that the person knows how to do or is adept at doing, but it's something that you could provide feedback like, hey, I know this is what you're asking, but let's practice. Because if they're not doing it with you, they're probably not doing it with prospective employers. So we want to make sure that we are cultivating those social skills with your clients with ASD. Many of the clients that I work with have been radicalized. And so One of the things that I think about is how did they go down that rabbit hole? And how did their autism make them vulnerable to either being recruited, where someone actually recruited them, or vulnerable to what they were seeing online, where then they were recruited? And one of the things that I have found is really helpful is taking that very intense focus that they have and start to change their thought channel. So I work a lot on cultivating and encouraging constructive, non-hateful interests, and I encourage you to do that as well. One of the places I start is, what was your life like before you got arrested? What were things you used to like to do? And, nobody ever starts out with, well, I really liked, this online hate community or that one. It's usually they had something before that. What was going on in the before time? If I can't, if they're not interested in that anymore, I talk about what are your post-incarceration dreams? Like, what would you love your life to look like, in 5 years, or after you're off parole, or after you're out of the detention center? What would you like your life to look like? Where would you like to be working? Where would you like to be living? Who would you like to be living with? What would you like to do in your free time? So again, let's start to look at those things that are not part of the radicalization, that are not part of the hateful interests. I'm going to give you an example of a young man that I've been working with for almost 3 years now. He was radicalized at age 13. And he engaged in his index offense at 18. So over the course of 5 years, it all started when someone said to him, have you heard about, and they mentioned the name of someone who is part of the anti-abortion movement. And he went down that rabbit hole. And as a person who is socially isolated, lots of social anxiety, lots of social awkwardness, didn't really have a friend group. Imagine finding a group that says something to them like, come to us. With your disability, we accept you exactly as you are, and we see your disability as a strength. Imagine that being the first time you got that message in your life. So he started out looking at the anti-abortion movement, but as you know how the algorithms work, the longer he stayed on those websites, the more he was exposed to other extremist ideology, like white supremacist ideology, xenophobia, homophobia, anti-Semitic ideology. When he engaged in his index offense at 18, he was arrested and actually was planning something even far more devastating than the crime he was actually arrested for. So it was an instance of averted violence as well as completed violence. Over the past almost 3 years, it turns out that this young man had lots and lots of interests prior to getting radicalized and prior to his arrest. Really interested in carpentry. I helped him finish his GED, and he's now enrolled in a college woodworking course. He was originally trying to build birdhouses and garden boxes, and that became a passion for him, which actually led to him planting a beautiful vegetable garden. You know, when you plant vegetables and are outside, you start to notice nature, and all of a sudden he became really interested in birds. So has applied to volunteer at a bird sanctuary. So again, it's we don't come at that radical ideology and say you can't do that anymore, because nature abhors a vacuum, right? And we can't go at it that way. What we have to do is start to change that and redirect those interests. And This has now become his deep interest. These are the things that make him feel important and like he belongs and he has a community and he has significance. I want to share with you something this young man told me. I told him I was going to be working on this project and hopefully sharing some ideas with people in law enforcement. And I said, you know, I feel like your voice is so important in this. Could you tell me what you thought worked well for you during this process? Here's what he said. My first PO was good. I remember she actually drove me to Home Depot to buy gardening supplies. She also drove me to the Habitats for Humanities building for an interview. So you see, someone found out what his deep interests were and immediately started helping him cultivate those. What did you like least about working with a probation officer? The distrust that was held for me and the constant supervision. Well, that's kind of the nature of it, right? One of the things I shared with him is that trust is a series of promises kept, and that's something that we all build up with our clients. What things would you want to see improved about this experience? He said rules should be very clearly explained in a step-by-step manner. So here he is telling us, like, hey, you know that task analysis thing? That's how you need to be explaining rules to me. And any changes in those rules should be explained before they're implemented. Then I asked him, what qualities do you think a probation officer should have to work with people who are neurodiverse? He said they should have patience, good explanation skills. That's what I can think of. What could have gone better? He said, I think it would have gone better if things like the job, the support getting a job, and my home visits had gotten started sooner instead of taking months. Things could have been explained better too, in a step-by-step manner. And because we're hoping for accountability with our clients, I said, well, is there anything you could have done differently to make your experiences better? And he said, maybe instead of focusing on how unreasonable the rules are and resenting it, I should have tried harder. I should have tried harder to understand exactly what the rules are and how to follow them. So I think it's really important for us to listen to the voices of people who are autistic, because there's so much they can teach us about this process, about how to take a process that is sometimes rigid, sometimes unclear, and make it clear so that they can be successful. So recapping those 3 tools, those visual schedules and establishing a routine, providing an agenda so your client knows what's going to happen when they're talking to you will go a long way towards reducing their anxiety and making the meetings be much more productive and go much smoother. A task analysis takes a big, huge task that can seem overwhelming to your client and breaks it down. It also allows them to take breaks, to regulate, and to build some reinforcement into it. And finally, redirect those problematic interests. I have found that to be such a rewarding thing, that passion, those circumscribed interests, those restricted behaviors that are part of the autism diagnosis can be redirected into things that are productive and adaptive and lead to a better life for people with autism. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. Here's my email. I really will get back to you. Here's some resources that I'd like to share with you. I tried to make every effort to let you access free and downloadable resources. The Able to Learn, if you have clients that are nonverbal, have low reading levels, or co-occurring cognitive disabilities, The Able to Learn has free pictures that can go along with the written things you're trying to put in place for your client, whether it's the schedule or the agenda. Todoist is a free app for scheduling routines. Great app. The Autism Research Institute is a treasure trove of resources for clients with autism. If you want to know a little bit more about how do we start to change that thought channel, read this article, The Benefits of Special Interests in Autism. When we cultivate those and capture those, it's lightning in a bottle for the person with autism, and we just need to make sure that we're pointing them in a more adaptive direction. And then a great example of task analysis job skills for adults is at this website. Again, all of this is free and downloadable, so I hope you'll take the opportunity to explore these resources. Thank you for your time. I appreciate the opportunity to spend time with you this afternoon, and hope that if you do need anything, you'll reach out.